In this video, we're focusing on changes in inputs and maybe more if time allots. But what changes in inputs are is that changes in inputs occurs through discoveries and investments and etc. And what we're going to focus on specifically first is changes in labor. So what this really means is what we're asking is what are the effects on the average standard of living if we change labor. So let's say we increase labor, then that will actually make ASL fall. So we have falling ASL, and when we have falling ASL, then we have the scenario usually is we have a negative ASL growth rate due to diminishing marginal products, and then from that we can assume that GDP growth rate is positive but is decreasing. So pretty much what is happening here is the same as the example discussed in the last video, where one person makes 10 bikes, two people make 18 bikes, three people makes 24 bikes. The GDP growth rate is positive. The growth rate is positive. We are making more and more, but it's decreasing. See, we make 8 and then we make 6 when we're increasing, when we're adding on one more person. And remember that ASL is calculated by having our GDP growth rate minus our population growth rate. And so, for example, uh, let's say ASL equals, let's say that our growth rate is 10%, and this is after we increased labor. So this pretty much slowed down our growth rate. It's a slowed growth rate, and we minus 20%, the growth rate of the population, and this grows fast. This grows fast. So if we take 10 minus 20, then we have minus 10%. So what we see here is that the GDP growth rate is positive, but it's slowed and it's decreasing because there are more people making bikes, and that's less efficient. If we have like 500 people in a small room, then people can't even move. It's less efficient. Then our GDP growth rate, the rate we're making things, are slowed, and this pretty much leads to our negative ASL growth rate, and that's how we get diminishing marginal product. Now the changes in capital is PK, or physical capital, or human capital is what we consider, and we're considering an increasing uh, physical capital only or human capital only, and doing either of these, increasing PK only or HK only, that leads to a rising ASL at a decreasing rate. And a rising ASL at a decreasing rate, that pretty much means that our ASL growth, we could assume that our ASL growth rate is positive but falling. So a good example for this is, let's say that we pretty much wiped out every human, and we replaced every human labor with machines. Now the machines have a positive growth rate. So we have a positive growth rate. So let's just write this down. Let's just write down the equation, and let's just write down the equation. ASL equals uh, growth rate. I'm just looking over my email. GDP growth rate. GDP. I'll just say GDP G for growth rate, and minus population G for population growth rate. Okay, so let's say that we wiped out every human and replaced it with robots. So machines, the growth rate is positive because they don't need sleep. They're getting better. They're making more and more every time. So the growth rate is positive. But as the machines age, then their 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 production becomes slower and slower. Let's say they're rusting, and because they're rusting, they're um, they're like about to break, and their production gets slower and slower, like the bike example. So let's say that there's no population, so this is 0. Uh, then with our robots, pretty much we're still producing output, but because of the rust, we're producing less and less. So we have a positive growth rate, but our growth rate is falling. And since now ASL is pretty much equal to GDP, since we have no population, we have rising ASL at a decreasing rate. That's pretty much the same as growth rate is positive but falling. And the last part is changes in technology and that's pretty much productivity, and that has an unpredictable effect on average standard of living. Pretty much, if our output is growing, if output is growing, and 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 it's not because of, but not it's not because of labor, but not by labor. It's not because of labor, human capital, or physical capital. Then it's technology. Then it's technology. So pretty much, if our output is growing, but it's not because we changed our labor, human capital, or physical capital, then we say it's technology. And I think I will stop here and move on to limits to growth in the next video. Please rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.